Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on SensCy's monthly webinar series. Today, we're joined by Nate Weisenberger, principal at the General Agency Company, and we're going to talk a little bit about cybersecurity insurance, educate you on cybersecurity insurance, and how does that fit into your overall cybersecurity plan. And building a plan definitely should involve exploring and obtaining cybersecurity insurance. So today we're going to try to educate you on that, give you what you need to know about that, and then also what you should be doing in addition to your cybersecurity insurance to shore up your cybersecurity hygiene posture. Once again, thank you all for joining today. You should have received an email from Eric welcoming you and thanking you for joining, and we appreciate you being here. I am Dave Kelly. I am one of the co-founders here at SensCy. I am the Chief Technology Officer. Just by way of background, spent 26 years with the Michigan State Police, actually ran Cyber Command for them. Michigan was the first state in the nation to have a fully functioning Cyber Command Center. So what does that mean? Not only were we tasked with protecting the state's networks, but we integrated that into our intelligence center. And so what we would do is we would go out and respond to incidents, do forensics work, determine the vector and the variant, which is how did they get in, and what did they use to get in, right? And then we would anonymize that data and share it with our critical infrastructure partners across the state. So in the early days of cyber, before everyone had in critical infrastructure started building out security teams, we were sharing that information with them so they could shore up their security holes and ensure that they didn't become a victim of a cyber incident. After that, went to work for a software company where I was in charge of helping them build out their platform to make their cybersecurity analysts more proactive. So those folks that worked in a security operations center to help them by leveraging some machine learning and AI models to help them be more proactive as opposed to reactive. So looking for anomalies on the network and then alerting the analysts to those anomalies so they knew what to go look at and potentially respond to. And throughout all of that, just realized that there was a real gap in the marketplace for the small and medium-sized organizations. Most of the tools that were out there were designed for larger companies, and cyber resources to hire can be very expensive. So that was the catalyst for really starting SensCy, was to really serve the small and medium-sized organizations with a affordable solution, something that they could afford that can help them mitigate risk. And through that, partnering with General Agency on the insurance side. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Nate. And Nate, welcome aboard, and we'll jump right into it.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Appreciate it. Afternoon, everybody. Hope everyone's having a good day and a good week. My name is Nate Weisenberger, owner and partner at General Agency Company. We are a 107-year family-operated insurance agency located in Mount Pleasant, Michigan. I myself have worked at the business here for coming up on 12 years. Started in claims, took in all of our commercial customers' claims from workers' compensation, cyber liability, auto, general liability, etc. So I got a good appreciation of that background early on. Recently now, aside from the business day-to-day, working with my customers on their risk appetite, some of the areas that they're exposed to, whether they be manufacturing, transportation, habitational. There's no line of coverage in the insurance industry right now that is easy or not volatile. So we have been working and have had the opportunity to work with SensCy on educating our customers, centers of influence, groups and associations on some of the challenges businesses and association members are facing, specific to cyber liability and the insurance end of that. We have recently partnered with the Michigan Manufacturers Association. General Agency is the exclusive provider of cyber liability insurance. So we have started a collaborative with Dave and his team at SensCy, and I'll get into a few exciting things we have coming down the line here in a little bit near the end of my part of the presentation. But really excited to speak with everyone here today, and appreciate everyone taking the time to sit in and listen in. All right, so on the insurance side, I wanted to go through some of the targeted industries, some of the options we're seeing in the marketplace, some questions that whether it be your owner, your controller, your CFO, your CTO, whoever that may be, can ask and look at with their insurance agency specific to the cyber liability program. There's 50 carriers out there, all with different coverages and different forms and different exclusions. And navigating that is, especially for someone who it's only in front of once a year, right? For your renewal. It's extremely challenging to navigate that and keep up with that marketplace. So today, like I said, we're going to talk about some of the different industries that are seeing the highest amount or volume of cyber-related threats, attacks, ransomware, incidents, etc. So manufacturers is one of, if not the most targeted industry and group of companies, whether that be just through the United States domestically, internationally. Manufacturers are constantly facing threats through ransomware, employees opening emails. So much of the equipment for manufacturers is automated, set up and plugged in. You have employees who are plugging in all the information that runs all of this equipment. So there's a huge dependence on operational technology for manufacturers. And that is where a lot of these, we'll refer to them as attackers. That is where they're targeting. That is what they're looking at when we're seeing these different cyber threats. So just to go through some of the scenarios, you might say, of what a company looks at as far as costs as a result of these attacks. So with manufacturers being one of the 5 top targeted industries, in the last 4 years, there's been 725 claims, averaging 180 per year. This talks about some of the total costs. And like I said, these are manufacturers in the United States. So they've used averages specific to total costs on the types of attacks, notifying, monitoring, and forensics as a result of the breach. What types of attacks specifically are the most prevalent? Business email compromise, we get into that. So much of what attackers are watching and monitoring, they can be let in with just a simple employee opening an email. So ransomware, of those 725 claims, makes up a majority of those attacks. And Dave is much more fluent in specifically, if it's ransomware, how do they get in? What do they get at? But the ransomware is essentially when they come in and say, we have your system, we have your network, we are shutting you out unless you pay us X or unless you release this. So ransomware makes up a majority of these claims that we're seeing, especially for manufacturers here in the last 4 years. Business email compromise is right behind that at roughly 10%. Like I said, those are when the attackers are monitoring emails coming in and out of the company to the employees' stations, to the servers, etc. So opening those emails is one of the ways that many of these attackers can make their way in. Theft of money and wire transfer fraud. So that's a coverage specifically, not so much on the cyber liability, but more on your crime policy, where you're transferring money, and in lieu of that transfer, whether that be to a bank, to a supplier, that is fraudulently intercepted. And $10,000, $50,000, $100,000 transfers all of a sudden don't get to their final location. That's a claim. That's a covered cause of loss. And that makes up 5% of some of these claims we've been seeing with manufacturers. Average total crisis costs, and this is all different kinds of cyber events, specific to, like I mentioned, ransomware, business email compromise, and wire transfer. So average total crisis costs as a result of a claim in those different areas for manufacturers specifically is averaging $174,000. So that would come from your cyber liability limit on your insurance policy, whether you're carrying $100,000, $500,000, $1 million. Every year we're seeing the demand for higher limits continue to increase. Forensics. So when there's a breach, your insurance carrier has a team come in and assess how did they get in, what did they touch, what did they take, what are they monitoring, That's a huge piece of this because they're responding after the attack already happened. So these are specialty companies hired by the carrier. Only the largest carriers have these teams in-house. Much of it is some subcontracted. $54,000 in just the forensics piece. The monitoring. So for example, a manufacturer has a cyber liability attack and third-party information is accessed. So a lot of times you'll see with some of these big breaches in the past, Target, Equifax, here in the last five to 7 years, your information, you'll get an email, your information's been compromised. Here's how we're addressing it. If you feel like your information was at risk and has been affected, please sign up for our monitoring services. So that might be 24/7 monitoring through LifeLock. These are services that a part of your insurance aggregate, your limit, are going to be included, $3,000 there. Notification. For example, the state of Michigan requires all companies and businesses to notify through the mailing system, not email, not Facebook, not social media, sending out letters notifying every single one of your customers. We've experienced a breach. This is what we think they accessed. This is our response. Contact us if you need monitoring services. So notifying the customers, $8,000. Legal fees. When there's a claim, one of the first things that is done when that claim gets reported to the carrier and to our claims department is there is a legal team that is assigned to that case, to that claim. That's everything from their forensics team, and many carriers use that legal team as the corridor of communication. You've got forensics, you've got notification, you've got marketing campaigns. So legal fees is a big piece of these breaches after the fact. And then you got some other, call them supplementary costs, averaging around $88,000 that would fall outside of some of those areas I just mentioned. Specific to ransomware, you will see the highest amounts being paid out where we're seeing an average demand of $413,000. And that's across these 725 claims that we started with above. Or that we mentioned above. Interesting note, I read an article here in the last couple of weeks, and it said, even though the cyber liability activity is up, carriers and markets are seeing the ransomware attacks, as far as frequency of attacks, down. The volume and demand is still up, but the number of attacks is down. And there's a lot of circumstances that would affect that. You have the Ukraine situation. You have all sorts of issues going on in the Middle East. Maybe that's taking their attention. But what they said was the ransomware number of attacks is down because instead of threat actors and attackers coming into ABC manufacturing and saying, we have your system, pay us $50,000, they're sitting back as a snake in the grass and they're monitoring. They're not letting that manufacturer, that business know that they've taken their information and holding them hostage. They're sitting back and waiting longer. They're monitoring different areas that they're into, or the emails, or people getting in and out, watching banking information, watching transfers of money through wire or anything like that. So they're getting all this information before they're going in and actually doing the attack, which is nerve-wracking. But that's why they said some of the ransomware attacks, as far as number, might be down. So average demand, 413,000. Forensics. So like I said, a team comes in, what do they touch? What do they get? How do they get it? Etc. 355,000. Business interruption. So a manufacturer, this would be if a manufacturer has an order they're trying to get done for their customer, and they experience a breach, and their systems and logistics, etc., that controls their machines, it shuts down. The machines has nothing to answer to. That is going to delay that job, or potentially get to the point where that manufacturer's customer says, we've got to get this job done because we've got our customer who expects it by this date. We got to go down the road to a different manufacturer so that we don't lose our customer. You as a business just had a loss of revenue because you had that attack, could not complete the job, and you lost a customer because they still had to get things done in lieu of your attack. business interruption is a huge area of concern, especially for those big jobs. And then recovery expense, recovering the information that was compromised, that was taken, that was disrupted. I had a customer a couple years ago, a manufacturer, and they had a claim where the threat actor and the attacker came in, took all their CAD information on all of their projects. They were able to recreate a lot of it, but they'd had older jobs that they'd done 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that when those same customers called them back 2 years later, oh, hey, we want to get this going again. We got some orders coming in. My customer had to physically go down to that location in North Carolina, drive 12 hours, take pictures, take measurements, recreate all of that information that they already had, come back and plug it into their CAD system. Those are man hours. That was a covered cause of loss. All the hours, all the driving were tied into that entire payout of the claim. So the recovery expense is also a huge item to pay attention to. And then you look at business email compromise. So a lot of times that's going to be when a threat actor comes in and gets into an email from an employee opening a link, being on a website they shouldn't have. And you can see some of the fees associated with those same areas of forensics, monitoring, notification, etc. Wire fraud and theft of money. This is, while it's part of cyber liability policy responds when information that you as an owner of the business and a company are storing that is other people's information, proprietary information, credit card numbers, etc. Wire fraud and theft of money is when you as a business are transferring that money and it's intercepted or fraudulently taken. So it matches up not just with the cyber liability, but also a crime policy. What we've been seeing on the insurance side is insurance carriers are now including this coverage in the cyber liability limit, taking stress off of having to insure it on the crime side. You don't want to have the same coverage with two different policies. You're paying for twice the coverage, but with the same limit. Doesn't make any sense. So it says one of the stats, lastly, with most of these accounts fallen, companies between 0 and 25 million in revenue, limits that are typically purchased are at $2 million. I can tell you 4 years ago, I can count the number of customers that were carrying a $2 million limit as far as cyber liability on two hands. Now we're quoting 2 million, even if they're asking for one, just because if you go to the items that I reviewed on the slide, those costs continue to increase. These threat actors and attackers are getting smarter. They have more resources. They're taking their time and collecting more data and information. So the claims continue to increase. And one of the other items is we're seeing suppliers and call them start users, I believe is the word, requiring their manufacturers and customers to carry these higher limits. Federal government, state government, they're requiring higher limits on the cyber liability. So we'll get into this in a minute. Your $100,000 of cyber coverage that you have on your general liability policy isn't going to cut it. You are not adhering to the requirements from a customer or first time party. Average total crisis per company at 174,000. We kind of beat that up a little bit. So Dave, I'll have you go to the next slide. Some of the other affected industries, not everyone on this call is a manufacturer or owner of a manufacturing company. So some of the other industries that are heavily targeted for cyber liability threats is transportation, automation, heavy industrial, and critical infrastructure. Operational technology, until probably late last year, operational technology is the production outages, the equipment damage, the environmental disasters, even to the point where injuries and casualties. Now, injury and casualty is not something that's going to be a part of that cyber liability policy, but they refer to when it comes to operational technology, all of those items are part of it. So what we're seeing now is on a cyber liability insurance policy, very few carriers are working and including coverage for operational technology. For example, all your servers get fried after a cyber liability attack. If you don't have hardware coverage, if you don't have bricking, would be the term that you would see in an insurance policy, you're out of pocket for all those servers that are trashed. Some companies keep their servers on site. Some go through a third party. Some use the cloud. It's very different. But operational technology, as I'm reviewing cyber liability policies for my customers, operational technology, we have to have coverage in there for that because there's such a dependency, not so much on the software that is powering these systems that attackers want to get into, but it's the physical equipment. So that's what we're referring to when we speak of operational technology. And it's a coverage that I would say a majority of insurance carriers right now are not offering. We only have 3 carriers, and we're a good size operation. We have 3 carriers that do a good job with the operational technology piece. So pay attention to that. From 2019 to 23, the attacks in these areas have doubled annually, which just speaks to the activity. You look on your phone, you turn on the news, you turn on your computer, you're getting announcements. This attack, that cyber threat. Was this accident down here have anything to do with the cyber attack? It's almost daily. So there's more actors, there's more ways to get in. That these numbers keep growing, and that puts added stress on the insurance carriers' loss ratios, which right now they are all bleeding, if you can imagine that or not. And also with the coverages they offer. The coverages that are responding the most, they're separating. They're making the agent or the customer ask for those coverages specifically or fill out a supplemental. For example, carriers are asking for a supplemental specific to ransomware. If you want ransomware coverage, you'll fill out your cyber liability application. They're going to send you a separate coverage or supplemental just for ransomware. That's how often these claims are responding. So you'll see ransomware attacks have shown to slowed from fourth quarter of 2023. So I spoke about this a little bit ago. They're sitting back and waiting. The frequency has gone down. Demands have gone up, but the frequency has gone on because the attackers realize if they're more patient, if they sit back and monitor and don't let the cat out of the bag, so to speak, that they're there in your system, they're going to get more information and be able to hold you for more money or have more leverage down the road. Supply chain attacks are becoming a higher focus, which for manufacturers means your suppliers are breached and that loss runs downhill to you. So for a supplier that has a cyber liability attack, a manufacturer gets an email or a phone call from their supplier saying, hey, we've had a cyber liability attack. All orders are on hold. We're not sending anything out. We got no way of talking to our trucks. Our email is down, etc. As someone who's waiting for those orders from the supplier, you're sitting back going, we've got 9 different customers expecting orders for us to finish up that come from this one supplier. So we're building in coverages specific to supply chains, business interruption, and dependent business income. Those are the words you're looking for. Your business needs to be protected if your supplier experiences a breach and it adversely affects your business's ability to get out orders and maintain that revenue from those orders. Next slide, please, Dave. Let's talk specific insurance options. Everyone on this call, if you are involved with your insurance program for your business or you work with that in any regard, typically there's 2 different ways that carriers will provide cyber liability insurance. Number 1, it's called what's referred to as an add-on coverage. So a carrier, most of them will be regionals. So your Cincinnati's, your Michigan Insurance, your auto owners, your EMCs, those carriers will include a sublimit off of your general liability policy, $100,000, $250,000, maybe $500,000. These are not the best option for your business because there's more exclusions. It's not its own limit. It's tied in with your general liability as opposed to a monoline cyber liability policy. All it protects is cyber liability has its own aggregate and a separate aggregate so that if the business experiences a general liability claim, it doesn't pull away from that, giving you less coverage throughout the year. So a couple questions for everyone on the call that they can look at and ask, whether it be their agent or whoever's handling that cyber policy. Does your insurance policy limit stand alone, or is it a sublimit off of your general liability policy? Does your cyber liability policy include ransomware coverage? it'll spell it out. When you look at your declaration page on your cyber liability policy, it will list social engineering fraud, ransomware, theft of money and securities. It will list those items. Absolutely 100% zero questions asked, non-optional behavior. Make sure ransomware is on that deck page. Do you have bricking coverage for your equipment damaged amid the loss? Different companies have different exposures. Manufacturers who have a lot of equipment, absolutely make sure there's some type of bricking coverage built into your policy. If you've got an add-on policy or that's attached to your general liability, 9 out of 10 times you will not have bricking coverage and you will not have ransomware coverage unless you've asked or have gotten additional quotes for that. Does your cyber liability policy include social engineering fraudulent coverage? So what that is my accounts receivable person gets an email from me, the president, and I said, hey, I need you to release 1,000 gift cards to these customers, or I need you to change the bank account where people are pulling this money from. Due to lack of controls, lack of procedures, the person takes my email, goes to the bank, changes the account number, and updates that account number as instructed by her boss through email. Doesn't pick up the phone, doesn't confirm. That's a social engineering claim. Typically, you have to ask for that coverage because it's become so prevalent and carriers are having to respond to it so often. It's always upfront controls and procedure. Do they pick up the phone? Do they follow up? Is there dual authentication? That's the first line of defense because insurance, once the insurance responds, and we'll get to this, it's already too late. The breach has already happened because insurance doesn't respond until there's a claim. Any coverage in there for actual revenue and business income because of the breach. So if your supplier, or if you get all of your steel or all of your product from one company, if you lose that relationship for 9 days because they experienced a really bad cyber attack, you're going to take a hit. You're going to take a lump on the chin. So is the revenue that you're getting from your customers as a result of working with that supplier, for example, is your revenue insured? Business income, business interruption, dependent business income. Look for those line items on your policy. Identify the coverage that protects your operational technology. That includes a wealth of things that we've spoke on. The bricking, so it's the physical, the hardware, the software, your people, the equipment. I mentioned the bricking equipment out on the floor, the technology piece, the electronic systems that power all the equipment. In insurance carriers' minds, the electronics that power the equipment and the physical pieces of equipment oftentimes are two different things. If that's clear as mud, then I'm telling you what, that's something that you need to pay attention to. How long is your restoration period? So average restoration periods are anywhere from 180 days or 12 months. And by restoration period, I mean that carrier is going to pay for this claim either up to the limit or they're only going to pay on it for that restoration period. Now, what we're doing is we are wanting broader coverages and broader timelines on restoration periods. We're asking for 24 months restoration period or 12 months at the minimum. The claim I used an example of where my customer lost a bunch of CAD information and had to recreate all that, that went on for 19 months. If we wouldn't have had a 24-month restoration period, everything after 12 months was out of pocket. That's the travel down to that customer in Carolina, the gas, having his person back at their shop manually enter all that in, which totaled 160 hours. So if you're paying your person $50 an hour and they had to spend 150 hours of inputting that, that's out of pocket after 12 months. So restoration period's huge. Make sure you're not limited there. Next slide, please, Dave. So I kind of got ahead of myself on the last slide. Monoline standalone cyber liability policies, $500,000, $1 million, $2 million. Spend time with your agent or give us a call and let's talk about that, because add-on coverages is no comparison to a standalone cyber liability coverage policy. The monoline standalones have broader coverage, less exclusions, more coverage in the sense of higher sublimits than these add-on policies. So businesses are recognizing there's insufficient limits and coverages with the policies that come from the general liability policy. That's the toughest part about cyber liability these days. It isn't just the add-on policies, but also those monoline policies. Every carrier has different language, different forms, different sublimits. We expect over the next 2 to 5 years for a lot of that to get consolidated. General liability policy, for example, you read your declaration page. It says aggregate, it says occurrence, it says personal and advertising injury, it says medical expense. As an agent, as carriers, I know everyone wants to get to where we can start to consolidate and streamline that. The challenge is every day, every month, every year, there's different threat actors, there's more of them, there's different types of attacks. So carriers have to adjust their coverages to respond to protect the businesses. It's a big challenge, especially for carriers who have 100%, 120% combined loss ratio. By the way, anything past 50% loss ratio is non-profitable, if that paints any picture for everyone. So sublimits are a fraction of the total aggregate when you compare an add-on coverage with the monoline standalone cyber policy. 60% of businesses close their doors within 6 months of experiencing a breach. When I say 60% of businesses, I'm talking anywhere from $1 to $4 million a year revenue operations. So these are on the smaller to medium-sized businesses who don't have these policies and don't have the right coverages in effect. A significant breach is almost ending for the business. Everything's out of pocket. The lawyers, the recovery, the hiring a third-party firm to come in and handle everything. Cyber add-on range from $500 to $750. So I've got a general liability policy with $100,000 of cyber sublimit. I'm spending $750 a year on. Insurance is like everything else. You get what you pay for. If that costs you $500 for $100,000 of insurance, of limit for your cyber liability, and there's monoline cyber liability policies, which are more expensive, but I can get granular on the differences in coverages. I'm not going to do that to everyone right now because I wouldn't dare. But anyways, big difference in coverages, big difference in forms, big difference in exclusions. It is cheap for a reason. Specific to these add-on coverages, it costs $750 for $100,000 of coverage. Also, the services that come from these carriers after the loss are significantly less than a standalone cyber liability product. These standalone cyber markets, they've got legal teams, forensic teams, IT teams who jump on your claim day one, which all of this is super time sensitive. So I'd stress this. If your business experiences a claim, your first call is to get that reported to your insurance carrier, because time is money and they get people on it for the most part as soon as possible. So those forensic services and legal services that maybe would be part of a general liability add-on policy are nowhere close to the level of expertise and comfort you'll get from these monoline standalone cyber policies. I beat this up a little bit. Ransomware and social engineering attacks drive all these cyber carriers' losses and typically must be requested to be included on your policy. Pay close attention if you have those coverages or not. Next slide, please, Dave. When you need insurance, and this is kind of my tie-in to, it's a two-prong approach. Insurance responds after the claim happens. So when you get a breach, when that claim happens, it doesn't matter what you did or didn't do ahead of that when that claim already happens, because you're in it. Here we go. What's the plan? What's your action plan? How are you going to respond to customers? What do you need to get back into full operations? If you don't ask those questions ahead of when that claim happens, everyone's running around in circles when the claim happens. I've talked to Dave and the team at SensCy, and they've told me stories of customers that didn't sign up and start working with them when the claim happens. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know who to call. They didn't know the process. So what I'm saying is insurance doesn't respond until the claim happens. So what are some of the things the business can do on the front end, A, to protect themselves, B, have a plan, but C, avoid having to use the insurance in the first place. It's the most ironic thing with insurance. The insurance that I'm selling to my customers, I hope they never use. I don't think that applies to any other organization or industry where a salesperson is selling something they hope the customer never has to use. So let's talk about some of the ways that we avoid using the insurance, get protected, and have these conversations before the insurance comes in. And I'll let Dave take it from here.
All right, I was on mute. All right, let's start over. So thanks again, Nate. I greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Hopefully everyone learned something today and is if you have one takeaway from this, it's dig into your policy and make sure you know what you have, right? Because it can be confusing, and reach out to Nate. I'm sure he'd be happy to help go through it and translate anything for you. So as Nate mentioned, one of the issues is by the time you make a claim, right, it's already too late. You already have a big problem on your hands. And there are some things, while your cybersecurity liability insurance is a must as part of a sound cybersecurity strategy. You have to think about the other things that you need to do in advance of that, because the insurance can't protect you from the reputational damage that's going to occur, right? Clients losing trust, and those types of things. And we see on average, after a company has a cybersecurity breach, the average is a 22% revenue loss over the following 2 years, right? So as customers think, well, I can do business with this company or I can go to their competitor, right? Where that hasn't had a cybersecurity breach. So let's talk about the things you can do to protect yourself, right? So you don't have to make that claim. There's a misconception out there that only large businesses are targeted. I think that's caused mainly by the media. They cover large breaches, right? Because they're more interesting. They don't cover breaches of smaller organizations. So when we hear about all of these large companies being breached, it tends to kind of lull us to sleep as far as how much we're at risk. And the reality is small and mid-sized organizations are very at risk. And there's been a huge increase, as you can see, 420% year over year in cyber attacks against small and medium-sized organizations. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly in the essence of time because I want to be respectful of everyone's time. But I do want to mention that if you want this presentation, Eric already reached out to you to welcome you, Eric Kirkus, so you can reach out and he'll send you a copy. So let's talk about some national statistics. 54% of small businesses think they're too small for a cyber attack, probably because of what they see in the media. And the reality is 43% of cyber attacks are actually targeted specifically at small businesses, because the threat actors are learning that small businesses are less likely to be doing something to improve their cyber posture than the large companies are. 47% of small businesses with fewer than 50 employees don't have a cybersecurity budget. This is something that will change over time as these attacks increase. 52% of small businesses don't have dedicated cybersecurity IT employees or partner with someone with a sole focus on cybersecurity. We at SensCy here started this company to help with that, because cybersecurity personnel can be very expensive. And so we had created an affordable solution as a partner to help step in and fix that problem. Nate talked about some of these statistics already, but just figuring out how the cyber attack occurred can cost $15,000 on average. That's just having somebody come in and determine what happened. And then this one's really interesting. The average small, medium-sized organization that experienced a cyber attack that was caused by a compromised password, that was the cost of it on average. We'll jump into some stats here that SensCy uncovers. We've done hundreds of cyber health events in small and medium-sized organizations. And this is some of the stuff we found that we want to try to correct. So 68% of small business owners do not receive cybersecurity status briefings, so they're not aware of what's going on in the organization when it comes to cybersecurity. 66% do not have policies. 47% do not conduct awareness training. This is huge. we need to have trained employees because they need to be our first line of defense as opposed to a liability. 63% do not have an incident response plan. So Nate talked about how the cost can go up the longer you're down. If you have a plan, you can mitigate that. And then tying into this bullet over here about passwords, 48% do not have a password policy that forces a change at least once a year. So is that hoping and praying for luck? That's not the strategy you want to employ. So what should we be doing? I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly here. So common attack types, phishing and smishing. I think we're all familiar with what phishing emails are. They're emails that are coming into your system where the threat actors are trying to get your employees to do something they shouldn't do. Smishing just means they're coming in by text message. Nate covered ransomware. Malware is similar to ransomware. Either they're looking to lock you out of your systems, or they're looking to exfiltrate data and then hold you hostage, or they'll release the data publicly. Business email compromise. A quick story about this. We had a client. We do awareness training for our clients, right? And these are short videos. And we had a client call us and say that, hey, your awareness training video that you guys just put out about business email compromise just saved me a couple $100,000. What had happened was he got an email from his vendor saying his bank accounting information had changed, the vendor's bank account information, and we had just did a training session on this for his employees. And he went down to the bottom of the email and everything looked right, but he decided to call the client from the number that was in his phone as opposed to the number that was in the email. And thankfully he did that because it turned out that the vendor said, hey, we did not change our banking information. And so what had happened was not only was able to save that wire transfer from going to a threat actor, he was able to tell that vendor that, hey, you got someone inside your email system because that email came from you. So these are real problems that are happening in real time. Spear phishing is just where they do a lot of research on your company. And so they know what you do, they know what your business is, and they target these phishing campaigns directly to something that would seem very real to you. Denial of service, they're trying to take down your public-facing assets like your website and so forth. And then code injection attacks can also happen on any type of software that's not properly secured. All right, so what can we do to protect ourselves? We need to start with basic cyber hygiene. 88% of these incidents can be avoided by having the basic cyber hygiene right. So what are some of those things? Strong passwords, right? We need to have a password policy that forces us to use strong passwords and make sure we don't reuse our passwords. So what happens with a reused password is I'm using the same password for my Netflix account that I'm using at work. Netflix has a breach. What I do as a threat actor then is I go to the dark web, I buy those credentials from the Netflix breach, and then I go to LinkedIn, I find Dave Kelly on LinkedIn. I'm like, okay, I have his personal password to his Netflix account. Let me figure out his SensCy email account. So it's Dave Kelly at SensCy.com, Kelly Dave at SensCy.com, Kelly D at SensCy. Eventually I'm going to figure it out. And if Dave Kelly, if I'm reusing the same password on Netflix, now I'm into the work system. Now as a threat actor, I'm into the work system. So that's why we want to never do that. Awareness training, I mentioned this earlier, super critical. We need to make sure that we're putting that out to our employees on a regular cadence. Regular backups, this will help you recover from ransomware, so make sure they're segregated on a separate service. Patching, security patches are put out by software vendors for a reason, and that reason is they know that the threat actors have already figured out how to exploit their software. So by the time we get that alert, we're already behind the threat actors, so we need to make sure we install those immediately, and we recommend within 48 hours. I mentioned this earlier in my example with our client. If anybody's asking you to change financial data or provide personal data, use your internal contact information to figure out if it's real. These ones I'm going to jump through a little bit quickly because we're up against the clock. Multi-factor and enroll it wherever you can. Be vigilant with links and attachments. One thing you can do is hover over those links, make sure they're going to the place that you expect them to go. And if asking for your credentials or payment, it's definitely a scam. Virtual private network, that's something you should be using when you're outside of the office. So if you have to connect to a Wi-Fi that's not yours, use a VPN. Antivirus and malware, what we most of the time see with this is most people have it on, but they're not updating their subscriptions on every device. So make sure you're updating your subscriptions. And then reach out to SensCy. We're here to help. We can help you build the proper cybersecurity strategy and cybersecurity plan. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how to protect your family because I think this is really important. Um, the behavior that we do in our work life and our personal life now is kind of started merging. People are working from home. We're relying more on technology at home. Our kids are relying on it for school. So we need to be vigilant in our personal lives as well. Credit protection services are affordable. Family plans are about $200 per year. Password managers, what password managers do is they pick the password for you. They make sure it's complex. They make sure you don't reuse it. You don't have to do anything. And we all have hundreds of passwords now. So super useful, cost about $80 per year. Install multi-factor wherever you can. Secure your home Wi-Fi. At least change the default password, the one that's on the sticker on the bottom, because others know that, and the name of the router. And make sure it's not the name of the actual piece of hardware or anything that identifies you. Upgrade your devices regularly, so turn on auto updates and use biometrics whenever possible. And then you can buy a personal VPN if you do travel a lot or you're outside of the office a lot or you're outside of your home a lot. We recommend getting a VPN. They're about $150 a year to protect you when you're on those networks that aren't yours. And then finally, back up your data, right? We've seen people lose entire Facebook accounts, all of their photos, all these things that are important to them because they just simply weren't backing up their data and some threat actor got into their home network. And here's some helpful resources. I said if you want this presentation, just reach out to Eric. Eric will reply to Eric's email. He'll send it on to you, but here's some helpful resources for you. And then finally, two things I'd like to offer, one from us and one from Nate. Number one, for everyone who joins this webinar today, free, no obligation, we will give your business a cyber health assessment. It'll be easy for you to understand. We've designed it. It's a proprietary algorithm that we designed, follows the National Institute of Standards and Technology framework, which is a framework of identify, detect, protect, respond, recover, and govern, right? It's about 39 questions, takes 30 minutes. We can do it guided. So one of our personnel will come on the phone with you and guide you through it, or you can take a self-assessment. And if you hover over that QR code there, it'll take you right to how you sign up for that. And what's really nice about it is it's based on it's like you could think of it like a credit score for your cyber health, right? So we all know that a good credit score is 800 or above. And as we get below that, our credit is worse and it becomes more difficult to get financing, right? It's the same thing with this score. We're looking to get everybody above 800 that are clients, 800 to 1,000. And if they're non-clients, they can at least have an idea of where they stand. So scan that, go to SensCy.com/SensCy-score, and you can get that no obligation. And Nate?
Thanks, Dave. So what I talked about earlier, there's the upfront cybersecurity. What's the plan? What does it look like? And then there's how the insurance responds. So what us and SensCy did is we have an insurance offering that is focused on that approach. They know what SensCy does. They know there's going to be a score. They want to know what the action plan is. Like anything, plan to avoid the claims, avoid the injury, avoid the situation. That's more skin in the game that you're going to have, and the less, for the most part, on your cyber liabilities policy specifically, the lower the premium. The better the risk, the less exposure, the less the carrier is going to have to respond to. So we did ask that when you do your score and that assessment come through, SensCy is going to build out that action plan of services that they would be able to provide to you. We want to use that for your cyber liability market. So we have a product in place that if you take a picture of that hashtag right there and fill out that supplemental, we can provide a quote within 24 hours for your cyber liability. Obviously, I'm happy to answer any questions for any of the members on the group specific to insurance. We'd love the opportunity to work with you and your company. Please let us know if you have any questions. Really appreciate everyone jumping on today, and hope there was at least a couple takeaways from the presentation. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining. Sorry we went a couple hours, so we don't have time for questions. However, as I mentioned earlier, Eric Kirkus sent you an email. If you do have any questions, please respond to that email. If there are insurance questions for general agency, we'll make sure to get them over to Nate, or if there are questions for us, we're happy to answer any questions you might have. And once again, thank you all for joining today, and we hope you'll join next month as well. Have a great day, everyone.